For someone with zero background in design, there's a quick and fast way how you can get started with your own branding. Hi guys, I'm Max. Today I want to share my process that you can follow along even though you're not a designer to create your own brand design from scratch. You can also find a PDF in the description where you can check off different boxes because I want to share with you the different steps that you can take yourself. Just download it, print it out, follow along, grab a cup of coffee and enjoy this video. How do you get started? I mean, of course, branding seems quite complicated, but there are simple steps you can follow along to. I think the first thing you have to remind yourself or to be aware of is how do you want to stick out? How do you want to be different? Try to view when creating your own branding design assets from a perspective of, okay, I don't want to be as everybody else. And of course you want to be different because that's the way how you can actually appeal to customer in a certain way. Even if you, for example, don't have a certain, let's call them brand aesthetics, your audience in general might perceive you as, not experienced enough. And branding is not only about looking cool or fancy, it's more about the people. It's about the brand that you create that maybe provides product or services should be this kind of safe space that they feel connected to. The different assets that you can use are not only visual, but also the experience that I get from the whole process. But in this video, I want to quickly show you the different visual parts of branding that you can use to create this connection with your potential customers. And therefore you can just follow along 5 different steps that I find are probably the most important things, whether or not you're a designer, even though you may work in a completely different field. Maybe you are a service provider, maybe you are your own CEO or a freelancer or an entrepreneur, because good branding at the end will create more revenue if you have the chance customer not only come to you, but actually stick with you and engage with you and then become returning customers. You want to stay cohesive. You may have a lot of different touch points, for example, social media, your logo, your website, products, services. And when people interact with you, they have to remember you. So therefore you have to be memorable. And that is what we talked about earlier. You have to stick out and be different to be memorable. You have to create a sort of branding style and aesthetic that just works for you, but then stick to it and be cohesive through all your touch points. People should recognize you when they, for example, see your product, see your logo, see your website. And to create this kind of cohesive look, you want to create these brand assets. You can imagine them as building blocks. Your colors, your typefaces, so your fonts basically, that you choose beforehand, and then you can reuse them every time you need them. And that's the way how you can create a cohesive look, because you then don't have to think anymore. You think once, and then you can just apply it to every touch point that you have. Okay then, let's create those building blocks for you. Let's start with choosing your color palette. For the first step here, you can easily just use your either favorite color, or if you want to go a bit more in depth and be more different to your competitors, if you already know in what kind of market you are working in, you can take a look at them and make a quick and dirty competitor analysis. Look around and see what colors they use and figure out that you can choose a completely different color. So let's say, for example, you're a florist, so you're working in a flower shop that sells flowers and plants and all of this kind of stuff. You probably think of the color green or yellow. And most companies use this kind of color if they work in this kind of market. But maybe you can be the one that uses pink. Let's be a pink or purple florist shop that provides plants and a whole new experience. Let's be honest, I personally can't really think of any major flower shop that has a whole pinkish look to it. So I think this is the first step to choose your colors to stick out. But of course, today we're only going to talk about how you can create a dirty and fast, but also polished look for your brand aesthetics. After you've chosen your favorite color, you can then go over and choose 1 to 2 secondary colors, which will basically be, as the word says, secondary to your main color. And then, for example, you can use complementary colors. You can also just go to different websites, which I will link you down in the bio, that you can use to figure out what your secondary color might be. But of course, your primary color should be a bit more prominent and should be used more often when presenting your brand. Lastly, we want to choose 2 to 3 different, let's call them neutral colors. So colors that are not only black or white or monochrome, they should be a bit more not that saturated, if that makes sense, because they shouldn't be that prominent. They should convey a more natural vibe to the customer. Because if you use all different vibrant colors, for example, your website, your Instagram posts, your collateral designs, so like flyers or business cards, etc., will get just way too like overwhelming for the customer's eye. You want to choose like one primary color that you are known for basically, and two secondary colors that you can use to as like an accent color, but your neutral colors, your like the third color area that you want to choose, you will use them more in places where they take like a lot of the majority of negative space. So for example, like maybe the website background or the business card itself, maybe the background of the flyer, just because if you only have your primary color really like bold in people's faces, it could get like too overwhelmed and you want to use your primary color more focused. Also a really handy way to decide how much space you want to dedicate to a specific area. Let's say for example an Instagram post or a website, you can use the rule of thumb that goes something like that you want to dedicate like 60% for neutral colors, 30% primary colors and 10% secondary colors. It's just a handy way to like quickly know how much you actually want to use this color. Next up is choosing your type. I personally recommend when starting out, choose one single font for like all headlines, like all the body tags and like call to actions, for example, like links and stuff like that. The other way is to choose like two fonts because you don't want to overwhelm yourself and get confused, especially when you're not the only one working on your project or brand. Because for example, if you are a team of like 2 or more people, it could get really confusing if you have like a lot of guidelines early on. And I think as easier as you can make it for other people, the better and the more cohesive your overall brand aesthetic can stay. And here it's really up to you what kind of fonts you want to use. I personally recommend that you should definitely try to look out for a good readable font for your body text. Most of the times the body text is like smaller than your headlines, and therefore they should be also really good to read. And for your headline, you can maybe choose a bit like a bolder font or more like playful font that's maybe even a bit harder to read, because there you have the benefit that the spacing around and inside the different letters are most of the time a bit more like wider, a bit more opener, and therefore the viewer can better distinguish between the different letters and therefore better read them. Of course you want to look cool and appealing to your customers, but depending on like what niche or what market you are in, don't use fonts that are too hard to read, because at the end it really comes down that people can understand you and therefore have the ability to connect with you and engage with you. To download fonts, I've put a couple of different links in the description you can check out. Some of them are only for private use, some of them are also like for commercial use. There are paid and free licensing options. Just check out for yourself whatever fits best for you. I personally recommend choosing a commercial free font because you don't want to use like default fonts, for example like Helvetica or Arial, because then you are like everybody else and you want to stick out, remember? And the benefit of using a licensed font is that most people or most brands probably don't use them. But again, maybe you don't have the budget at the beginning, so just use a commercial free font that is not in your like standard operating system as macOS or Windows, for example. After you've decided on one or more type fonts that you want to use, you can then go over and choose your image and graphic style. I think the image and graphic style is one category of branding that most people don't really see the potential in, but I personally think that it's really important to like stick to one style of imaging, if you know what I mean. So let's, for example, you watch something on YouTube and you see people using like different stock footage videos. You can definitely differentiate between a content creator that uses stock footage and somebody that shoots everything themselves, because the look and feel of the images and the videos look way more cohesive and maybe even better and more compelling than somebody that uses stock footage. I'm not saying that stock footage is always bad. There are definitely websites that provide good stock footage or stock footage that maybe even help you out in the beginning. But I'm just saying that if you have the chance to like take your own photos and own videos, you should definitely do it. It's of course more work, but if you know how you can like work around and use a camera, maybe your whole brand aesthetic will just look way more cohesive, and you have the opportunity to adjust different settings on your camera, your editing style, to make your images look a certain way. And not only photos and videos should look cohesive, also your graphics that you want to use. Like really think about what kind of style that your brand wants to look like. You can use different websites to gather some inspiration, for example like Pinterest, Unsplash, Pexels, maybe just gather some photos that you really like and create a mood board. A mood board is basically just a board that has like different images in it that helps you remember a certain way you want to be perceived as. And it's also really beneficial if you want to reach out to other people in the future that you want to work with, because let's say you work with designers in the future, with product designers, with maybe videographers or product photographers, and they ask you how they should shoot your product, then you can maybe provide them with your mood board, and therefore they might have an easier time figuring out the way that your brand and your product should, like what feeling it should convey and what style it should have. Also, if you have the budget and you want to create a workspace where you can like just throw your brand elements in to remember them and to always have them easily accessible, you can think about using different platforms, for example like Notion or Millernote. I think those are perfect because let's say you're working in a team and somebody wants to figure out what color they should use, and instead of like writing you and asking you by text, for example, they can just take a look at this cloud-based workspace and have like every like brand asset or like branding rule in there, and it's easily accessible for everybody. Okay, perfect. Then let's go over and choose your pattern next. I think pattern is also a brand element that a lot of people underestimate, just because you don't really think about patterns. Most of the times they are subtle or used in a way that you don't really think about as a user. But I think that they can really be a strong element to take into your repertoire, because you can give plain spaces just so more life to it by just simply adding a pattern. And of course, if you are not a designer, you don't have to like start out and create this intricate pattern yourself. There are websites where you can like just easily download free patterns to use and just apply your fonts and colors to it that we've decided on before. And from there, you can even go beyond it and think about animations and how you want to use this pattern for like products, for transitions, for videos, for example. There are so much opportunities in ways how you can create a distinct pattern that is usable in a lot of different ways. Maybe on your business card, on your invoice, on your purchase order. It's a way that I personally think is really strong and important, that makes you memorable in a way that's not too complicated to do when starting out. Because if you've decided on different colors that you want to use, that you have in your color palette, maybe then you can choose a pattern or create a pattern yourself and play around with different color combinations, maybe reduce the intensities or the saturation, the vibrance, try different overlays and blend modes, for example. And this way you can create a pattern that is not that hard to create yourself, but it's still enough to just stick out and be cohesive to your overall brand. And lastly, we have probably the most important thing I want to talk about today, which is understanding the hierarchy of your brand elements. What I mean by that is basically we now figured out the colors and fonts and all of this kind of stuff. In the beginning, I called them different building blocks, different brand elements that you can play around with and like figure out what combination works best for you. Once you figured out the specific things that you can use them whenever and however you want. But to understand what the best way is to use them is to understanding hierarchy between those elements, but also the use cases. Let's say you want to create a website and you have a section in there with an image, with a headline, body text, and a call to action button. You have to figure out what is the most important thing and what is the least important thing. You have to prioritize the different things that you have. Normally, as humans, we are very visually. In this case, the image would probably be the most important thing because it's the most intriguing thing. If we take a look at it and if it's a good image that maybe even creates tension, it creates also interest. Then as users, we want to engage with this piece of content. Afterwards, I would say that maybe the headline is the most important thing, like the second most important thing besides the image. Just because, think about it as YouTube, for example. There you also have your thumbnail and your title. And the thumbnail quickly catches people and the title explains a bit what this video might be about. And the same goes also for other pieces of content. So again, on your website, the title then, maybe if you want to sell a product, would be the second most important thing, just because it gives more context to the image. And then you can ask yourself, what is the third most important thing? Is it my body text, which may explain the product a bit? Or is it my call to action button, which actually wants to let the customer engage and buy the product? And it's really up to you. I mean, you can even, for example, like place the button over the headline or make it even bigger than the headline if you think that the button is more important. You can leave stuff out. You have to understand the connection between those elements. And that is what I mean by hierarchy. Like, even though you may be not a designer, hierarchy is like one of the most important things you have to understand to become really, really good at understanding how you can be perceived as a person and as a brand that can connect and attract customers. You have to understand how they might see you and how they might react. And this is applicable to like all different areas, from your business cards to flyers to posters to your website, even to your business orders, like to your purchase orders or invoices. And also social media content, so Instagram posts, TikTok videos, YouTube thumbnails. If you understand what is the most important thing, what is the least important thing, you prioritize the different elements that you want to show and play around with it, then I think that you can create content and create awareness that really has the potential and the power to broaden and to grow your business and your brand itself. And some of the things that you can play around with are, for example, sizing, hue, saturation, luminance, so like the brightness basically, the way that different objects are placed. So for example, if an object is bigger, we might see it first, so it wouldn't make much sense if your headline is really, really small in the corner of your screen, if this is like one of your most important pieces of content that you want to show. So it's really up to you. Just figure out how you want to be perceived and then try to place your different elements accordingly. Yeah, that were all my tips for today. I hope you've enjoyed them and maybe you can even like use some of them. If you have any questions, you can always leave a comment down below. Also, as I mentioned in the beginning, you can download a free PDF using the link in my description. Basically, it provides you with a PDF, a checklist that you can check off, and it contains everything that I've talked about today. Could be handy for you to use when you want to start out and create your own brand aesthetic. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.